All right, now in the previous example, I talked about the eighth note groove. That's the underlying rhythm upon which we'll build other things, get into sixteenths and a lot of other subdivisions. The chord you're going to be playing can be viewed in diagram 1. In diagram 1, you have a D minor chord with an A minor form, and I have it written not in fingers, but in scale degrees, because there are going to be a lot of different fingerings that you would use. We'll talk about that in just a moment. So I want you to play this. Now, I'm starting this at a very elementary level, so hang in there if you're a more advanced player. Go to your 5th fret, bar the 5th through the 1st strings, but also let your first finger deaden the 6th string. That's because you want to mute that string. The root of your chord is going to be on the 5th string, and then with your remaining 3 fingers, form an A minor shape. We derived that from the original A minor folk chord as part of your EDCAG system, which is the minor counterpoint of your cage system. There's your D minor chord. Okay, now make sure it's nice and clean, and I said there'd be different fingerings because I had the scale degrees on the diagram. We'll get to that in just a moment. So let's look at some fingerings. Now for now, that's a very logical fingering. First finger's executing the bar, your 3rd finger's on the 4th string, 4th finger's on the 3rd string, 2nd finger's on the 2nd string. So go with this fingering, but then as you play these rhythms, you want to start enhancing your vocabulary and inventory of fingerings for chords. So another fingering would be a crossed fingering, where we reverse the 3rd and the 4th fingers, okay? It's a bit squeezed and tight. It works in the lower frets, not very effective up in the higher frets. It can be quite crowded, but it's an important tool. And you might say, why would I want that? Well, hang in there. I'm going to show you in some future lessons why you would want this fingering, okay? Another fingering would be a jazz double stop fingering, where you're playing both the 3rd and the 4th strings with your 3rd finger. Now, if you look closely, you'll see that I'm pressing down in between the 2 strings. Now, I've talked about this in many of my lessons. What does that do for you? Well, it frees up your 4th finger for adding other extensions and tones into the chord. If you can't do this, I understand if you never tried. It's one of these projects that might take a few years to get under your fingers, but it's well worth the effort. All right, so what we've covered were 3 fingerings for this D minor chord with the A minor form. All 4 fingers, then reversing your 3rd and your 4th fingers, we call it a crossed fingering, and then just using your 2nd and 3rd fingers and your 1st finger and not using your 4th finger, okay? So make sure you apply these fingerings as you go through these exercises, because you're going to be primarily working on your right hand, thinking about rhythms. It's kind of a no-brainer with this hand. Just hold the chord and get it clear. Well, the rhythm that you can be playing in example 1 is what I played back in the previous lesson when I talked about the 8th notes. Look at example 1, and you will see it in standard notation. We have the 8th notes written out. The 8th notes, if you don't know how to read them, you have the slash marks that are the note heads, the counterpart for regular notes, and then you have them grouped in beams of either 2 or 4. And the count, I have it written in there, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and we already covered this. I have your pick strokes. Now, follow the pick stroke guidelines. It's very, very important because there's a reason why you use a downstroke, there's a reason why you use an upstroke. Not only for sonic reasons, which I'll explain in just a minute, but also for the feel and the efficiency. Now, I'll explain the sonic issues. If I play a downstroke, then I'm initiating the stroke with a downstroke from some given string, and you hear that as being the prominent note. Whereas if I play an upstroke, the same thing holds true. So this allows me to capture notes and to put some dynamics and make one note in the chord perhaps a little bit louder, the initial note that I strike. That's why if you do all downstroke, it doesn't sound the same as you can hear it. The notes come out clearly. So those are the sonic considerations. Now the feel, if you use all downstrokes, it gets a little rigid. If you use down up, it's looser and smoother. So you can experiment with this later on to test what I'm talking about. All right, I've talked a lot. Let's just play this. Now hold your D minor chord. We're not going to play along with the jam track yet. I'm going to take it very slowly. I have it written as playing groups of 3 strings. Now understand that this is a gray area, because when you play your downstrokes, you might end up just hitting the 5th and the 4th strings and just a touch of the 3rd string. So I want you to not try to strum too many strings. That's one of the biggest mistakes I see, especially with my beginning guitar players. They want to strike all 6 strings all the time. We have no texture, and you don't develop the skill of eliminating excess motion, of zeroing in on things and being able to pick out different voices. So if you look at what I'm doing with my right hand, my picking hand, the wrist is working like a hinge. So it's very important that you don't try to play these Latin rhythms with a real stiff wrist. It's not going to work. You got to stay very loose. Because because you're going to have to get up some blazing tempos later on. That's your downstroke. Feel free to try just hitting the 5th and the 4th strings, or just the 3rd and 4th strings. You don't have to keep hitting that root. So the examples are just a starting point, a springboard for you to take some other directions with. The upstrokes I have written as coming from the 1st string. Same thing applies. It could be a couple of strings, it could be 3 strings, but don't try to go. That's just too much. So just play a few strings, start with what's written here. So let's just play it very slowly together. 1, 2, 3, 4. Down, up, down, up, down, up. Very simple. If you can already play, you can skip this lesson and move on to the next one. And then notice when you play faster, you don't change anything in terms of tension on this hand. Don't start going. Hear the trashy sound? Don't clench the pick real tight. Hold it loosely so you can get a smooth sound, because you are going to have to control your dynamics. And when I say that, we're going to be putting accents in. That's a huge part of Latin guitar, Latin rock guitar. Okay, so let's play along with the jam track now. I'll play along, and then I want you to play along. We'll go back and forth. I'll play a bar or a couple bars, and then it'll be your turn. All right, so let's go. One, 2, 3, 4. Now it's your turn. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now we'll do 2 bars each. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and your turn. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so let's stop the jam track. You now have a handle on how to get a smooth 8th note feel. And I really encourage you to practice playing that with different groups. Do you see what I'm doing here? That's how you're going to lend some variety into this very basic 8th note groove. We're going to be using this 8th note grid work as our template, and we'll play things that are coming right out of that, and we'll insert rests, we'll put some ties, some staccato, but make sure you're grounded in these 8th notes, and that as soon as you hear a Latin groove, you're able to identify the 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And even though there may be 16ths and other things going on, triplets, all kinds of things, make sure you know the 8th notes.